Hello, hello.
Well, hello everybody. Welcome back. If you've just joined us on Aquarius Rising Africa, maybe 20 minutes, half an hour ago, we had quite a disturbing decode on the latest fashion industry and what's being revealed there. So after that, I think I'm so grateful to have our beautiful Jessie talking to us about miracles and the miracles you've experienced in your life. Hello again, Jessie. Hello,
Hello,
morning.
hello.
Hello.
Great topic. I like it because I always believe miracles are our birthright. We just got to
Hmm.
realize that, and then it's available to us, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear about some of you. I know on the last time you were on Solutions, we spoke about your journey as an evangelist and what you were doing with people. It's just amazing. It's beautiful. So I'm sure you must have experienced some incredible, amazing miracles, not just you yourself, because I think your
Yeah.
life in itself is a beautiful miracle. You are one walking miracle. So maybe just some of the things you've experienced in your life, what you've seen, what you've been involved in. I'd love to hear more about it.
Yeah, definitely. I've got some good ones. I think we had talked with the evangelism stuff. That kind of was I would say, the beginning of some of the bigger miracles that I've witnessed in life. And it started with, basically the Lord calling me into uh, th- those evangelistic opportunities. And I talked about how, for a period of time, every time I knelt down to pray, the Lord would say to me, I want you to teach 5-day Bible clubs. And I argued with him and fought and rebelled because I didn't know what they were. I didn't even know where to search or where to start to find those things. And, so I kind of just put it off, but the Lord kept asking me every single day. And what he was really wanting was for me just to come to that place of surrender to say, okay, Lord, even though I can't see the picture yet and I don't know where you're taking me, I'm going to trust and, yes, I'll do it. But, because I couldn't see the path and I didn't understand what it was he was asking me to do. Instead, I got mad and I got angry about it and I got outright belligerent, and I've talked about that I do argue with God at times. And so, it got to the point where the last night of that 3-month request, I basically outright said to the Lord, there's no way you can make me do it. So that night, I went to work and, I worked for a great friend of mine. He owned a pizza shop back then, and that was one of my first jobs that I had. And I would deliver pizzas. And one of my other good friends who I went to high school with, he usually did the long runs, and I would do the short deliveries. But that night we had one of our other staff who usually served alcohol was gone, so I wouldn't serve alcohol. So we switched, and I decided to do the long deliveries while my friend did the short deliveries and served alcohol at the restaurant. And I can remember it was actually the very first delivery I went out on. And, I had the pizzas in my vehicle, and I can remember pulling up into this long driveway. And what caught my eye was that up by the door, there were all these white tulips. And I had not seen a white tulip yet. And I was like, what? Are those white tulips? I was like, it just looked so odd to me. And so I was focused on that, and I was excited to get up there so I could get a closer look at those tulips. But as, I shut off the vehicle and everything, as I turned around to grab the pizzas, all of a sudden the vehicle started rolling, and it was a mini truck, and the door hit me so that it literally knocked me down on the cement on my hands and knees. And then the wheel caught my left leg and started rolling up my left leg. And so here's how I know that the vehicle was off. The guy who I was delivering the pizza to saw it happening. He came running out and was like, oh my gosh, what should I do?" And I said, "Well, my leg's probably broke. Just get in and drive the vehicle, drive it off." So he got in and he had to turn the vehicle on. He had to remove the parking brake, which was on. Um, he had to take the parking brake off to drive it back over my foot, and my leg. So then he called the ambulance and, you know, they had come and they had cut my pants leg and I had tire tracks on the back of my leg, but literally my leg looked like it was squished flat. And the ambulance guy, he's like, "Kiddo, I hate to tell you this, but he's like, you should probably be prepared." He's like, "This looks really bad." And he's like, "You probably broke a lot of your bone." And he's like, "I'm surprised you're not in pain right now." And I said, "Yeah, I'm really not in pain. I was sore, but not like, I didn't have any excruciating pain." But he had told me that, probably everything was broken and I should just prepare for that. So then I went into the ER and my friend, from my work, he ended up meeting me there. And, we sat and waited through all the tests. And then this little old doctor who was there kept walking in the room and he'd say, "I can't believe it. I just can't believe it." And he'd walk back out. And we were like, "What the heck is going on? Like, what is he talking about?" So probably, after he did that several times, I finally said, "What can you not believe? What is going on? What are the tests saying?" And he turned around and he looked at me and he said, "Absolutely nothing is wrong." He said, "Not a bone is broken, not a ligament or tendon, nothing. Everything is perfectly fine. You can stand up and walk out and go home." And at the moment he said that, immediately after, the Lord says to me, "I want you to teach 5-day Bible clubs." And I was like, "Is that what this is all about?" And so finally I said, "Yes, Lord. Yes, fine. I'll teach five. I don't know what they are, but I will teach them," right? So, my friend still laughs about that because that, it's like out of all the things, that was what was on God's mind. And
And
so
God was not going to let up. And God was
he was
not going to
not
let
going to
you
let it
leave.
up. So then the next day, randomly, the next day, I get a phone call and it's this woman on the other end. And she says, "Jessie, someone gave me your name and said you may be interested in teaching 5-day Bible clubs." And I was like, "Really, Lord? Really?" I was like, "Yes, yes, I am. I'm 100% in. Sign me up. Tell me where to go." So that was Sarah Griswold. She was an amazing lady. I worked with her for years doing 5-day Bible clubs. But that was the first. So that was the first of the miracles was, that I got to experience um, that, you know, that traumatic event. And yet I walked away being completely unscathed from that. So one of the first miracles after that was this club where we had three boys that were brothers. And I knew scripture really well. I mean, I was known for I would memorize as much of it as I could, and I loved just reciting it and, would share it as I was teaching. And but anyway, these three boys had been very well trained by their father, and they they, were really giving me a run for my money because anytime I would start telling a story, they wouldn't even wait for me to share the verse. They would start saying, "Oh, that's, right here." And they would turn in the Bible to it and they would start reading the story for me. And so I had to laugh at these three boys. I think they were 11, uh, 11, 9, and 5. And so the youngest brother, the 5-year-old, he had actually been born mute. where he had not spoken a day in his life. And so, but he would turn in the scripture with his other brothers as they were saying the verses and, was super excited. Well, the last day of the club, I liked to allow and give the kids opportunities to do stuff. And so, I said, all right. I said, who wants to say the last prayer today? And all of a sudden, that little 5-year-old stands up and he's jumping and he's got his hand in the air and he says, me, pick me. And all of us are just like, did he just say that? And so I said, yeah, go ahead, pray. He prayed the most beautiful prayer. All of us were in tears and crying. When their dad came, the brothers ran up and they're like, Dad, Shane prayed today. And he was like, oh, that's nice. And they're like, no, Dad, you don't understand. He said the prayer. And their dad was just kind of like, wait, what? And they're like, he spoke. He actually spoke, Dad, and prayed the prayer. So that was one of the first miracles. And I never found out if the Lord completely healed him from that moment on, but the fact that he was able to speak that prayer was a mighty miracle and testament to those boys. So that
Wow.
was one of the first ones that was really fun. Um,
So did that make you getting whacked on your backside worth it? Did it? Was it worth it?
oh, absolutely. Yeah. I loved all those kids. I did a ton of clubs that summer right after that event. And, you know, these kids, they just, always were my heart and soul. One of them, I learned so much from them about my own faith, and they really grew my faith. One of
Yeah.
them, Dakota, he was one of my favorites. He was kind of like me, where he just was very mischievous child. And he was about 7 years old. And I could tell he was sitting there as I'm doing the club. He was intently listening. But we had one of the days, I usually had a co-teacher with me. And so like I would do the Bible story and then I would say, okay, whoever wants to know more about Jesus, come to the side with me, or I'd take them like to, usually we were like in a kitchen or dining room, and I'd take them into the living room and share more scripture with them and give out tracts and stuff. But that day I forgot that, my other teacher wasn't there, because usually she would go into the missionary story then with the kids who didn't want to, hear more about the Lord. So, I was going off of, what I normally did. And I just said, okay, whoever wants to know more about the Lord, come with me, and then it was like, oh, wait, what am I going to do with all the other children? Like if I leave them sitting there with nothing to do, they're going to start getting into trouble. Right. So I corrected myself and I said, oh, I forgot I don't have, my other teacher here today. So I said, we'll do this at the end. Let's go into the missionary story. And all of a sudden, little Dakota like hurls himself at me. And, I'm wearing a skirt and he literally clings to the bottom of my skirt and he starts shouting at the top of his voice, no, I want to know Jesus now. And I was like, Dakota, I promise I'm not going to leave without telling you about Jesus. And he was like, no, I want to know him now. And he was like literally screaming. And I was like, Dakota, calm down. It's okay. Like, I'm not going to leave without telling you. And he kept fighting with me. And I was sitting there, trying to control these other children who now were all like coming up to the front and like, we want to know him now. And it was like, okay, guys, I promise we're going to get back to Jesus. First, we're going to do the missionary story. And Dakota looks at me and he's like, cross your heart and hope to die. And I was like, oh, Dakota, believe me, I'm pretty sure God will strike me dead if I leave without telling you about Jesus.
Or you will.
So,
If God doesn't, you will.
right? I was like, oh, I know, I'm in for it if I don't tell you. So but afterwards we ended up praying together, and he did, he so passionately wanted to know the Lord. And I will never forget that I left and I was just like, man, like I've known the Lord for, since I was really little. And I was like, I have never had that type of passion for the Lord where I was literally clinging at somebody's skirt, not letting go and just saying, no, I want to hear, I want to know now. So, he was probably the one who taught me the most about that passion for the Lord. It's like, man,
Wow.
I want to seek God like that. I want to, be that invested where I want to hear the word and I'm willing to fall at somebody's feet and cling, to hear it, for those who are speaking the word. So he was one of my favorite kids. And,
Awesome.
then I had a group of kids that, it was 5 girls that their dad was, Jewish, and, there had been, I guess the division in the family was that the mom and the girls had come to the Lord, but their dad was still highly Jewish, and he, was very anti-Jesus. So, it caused a lot of hurt for these little girls because they wanted to share the things that they were learning in the Bible and the things that God was doing for them. But their dad would really like push them away and didn't want to hear anything. So they had been praying that their dad would be open. And he had I think it was a friend or a business worker had invited him to a Promise Keepers conference, and those back in the 90s were conferences that churches were putting on for the men, and they would use it as a recruiting tool for inviting for men to invite other men that they knew to church. So he had been at one of those conferences for the week that we were doing the Bible clubs, and so we actively every single day were praying for their dad to come to the Lord, and for that, that rejecting, outright obstinance and rejection of God, that would be broken. So the fifth day, the last day of club, he came home, and it was so interesting because as the girls ran out to him to meet him, he met them like he crouched down and just met them with open arms, and he started to cry. And he said, "Girls, I have something to share with you." And he said, I'm sorry that I've hurt you. I'm sorry that, I've been so volatile towards you with this. And he said, I came to the Lord this weekend. He said, so the Lord answered that prayer and he came to the Lord. Um,
Wow.
yeah,
That's
so those
incredible.
were
You
just
know,
amazing.
those, can you imagine being that little child in the family, who's this for me? Because I love to hear these stories, but, I kind of live myself into the characters a lot of the time.
Hmm. Yeah.
So it's like I can imagine being a little kid in that family, having this father who was obviously your role model, the one you love and adore the most out of every man in the world, right? And he has this side to him that is so hurtful and it is so
Hmm.
rejecting of you, right? And then suddenly, out of nowhere, he just changes and
Right.
he apologizes
Yeah,
and
and
he's
that's huge. Like, think of how many conflicts we have, how many
sure.
times people don't, get angry and yell, or, and don't think about that hurt that they've caused or apologize for it.
It is so important, just on that note, for the years I've worked with children, um, one thing I know for sure is when a child's parent humbles itself, himself, herself, whatever, and actually says to the child, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, I was wrong, and I'm going to try and do it
Right.
differently from now onwards. It's you, that's all a child needs. That's the healing balm. Where once those words come out of the adult's mouth, it's like
Mhm.
all the hurt dissolves. But then of course you've got to back that up, right? You've got to continue with it. You can't just go back tomorrow to being your old shitty ways again, you know?
Right.
Then you've got to start building a new relationship with that child. And for me, it is such a beautiful opportunity. And I want to really encourage every parent out there to humble yourself to your child,
Mhm.
apologize, listen to them, sit down on your knees and look at them in the eye, come down to their level
Yeah.
and ask them, apologize if you need to. Tell them you're going to change your ways. That is the first massive step to healing in a family. Honestly, we're looking at family healing, community healing.
Right.
It starts with us, and that's where it begins. And I love that story, Jessie, because that is something I say so much, and exactly what you're saying there. Just
Mm.
like the complete spiritual alchemy that occurs within that family is phenomenal when that happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at the same time, their story so resonated with my own because, I had issues with my own father that, um, you know, my dad had been somebody that as when I was a little child, we were so close. Like literally I was like an extra appendage. He'd always have me up on his shoulders or on his hip. He'd carry me around everywhere. Everywhere he went, I went to, and I was kind of like his pride and his joy. At age 3, he took me out with him and all his buddies. We'd go fishing for trout. And, the first trout I ever caught was a big 7 pounder. So I can remember he was taking pictures of that and telling all his buddies, like, "Can you believe she reeled that in herself?" And, it was little me with this big, massive fish. Um, and we were just super close. And then all of a sudden, at age 3.5, so right after I came to the Lord, um, we had it, within the same week, both his father and his grandfather suddenly died. And, so all of a sudden at that time, that's when my dad all of a sudden pushed me away. But there was no like renewing, like he didn't come back into that relationship. Like he continued to it was like he completely just shut off that relationship. So as a kid, I always in my mind I associated it with his grief and with those deaths. And so years later, after it was probably maybe 5 years after these clubs and stuff, that I had taught, I went back to reached out to him and said, "Hey, can we talk about some of this stuff?" And, just help me understand, like, understand your grief and why, that caused you to push away. And he said, "Oh," he said, "Well, it had nothing to do with their deaths." And I was like, "Oh, it didn't?" And he's like, "No." He's like, "Why don't you talk to your mother about that one?" And I was like, "Oh, there's more to the story." So I called my mom up and I said, "Okay, Dad said that I needed to ask you about this and, that it had something to do with you." And so then the story came out that, you know, my mom who had, she had experienced abuse in her childhood was, simply trying to be protective and had told him that it wasn't appropriate for him to spend so much time alone with me, that that could be seen as a bad thing because that was what she knew. And so the only way he knew how to not be accused of anything was just to have nothing to do with me at all. So that was what happened through that situation. And, the Lord used all these things with, the children that I worked with and stuff to stimulate some of that reconciliation. And, now it's a beautiful thing. My dad is one of my biggest supporters. And, um, was there after Josiah died, was when he came and was right alongside of us. And, now he's really invested in all of my children and has great relationships with them. So, sometimes these miracles are long in coming, but the Lord, hears our prayers because, how many years did I spend as a child after that? Even though my perception was wrong, um, my heart was to really be reconciled to my dad and to have that close relationship, and I prayed for that. I prayed for that for many years, and that was one of the prayers that the Lord answered. Um, like I've
Wow.
said, I've kept a journal, you know, for the majority of my life, and out of that journal, originally there was only 6 prayers that were unanswered in there. One of that 6th one now has been answered back in 2016. So there's only 5 that he has not answered yet. So,
Wow.
yeah.
That's
Awesome.
amazing. So you got your little tick list there, right?
I
You
do.
tick.
Yeah, I got that little it's like, "Oh, that one." So speaking about dads though, that was one of probably my favorite miracles just because it was so
Wow.
meaningful to me. I had my best friend, her father also went through a scary time with health where he came down with really bad health, and um, his life was on the line. And at the time, she was 8.5 months pregnant and, was expecting her first child. And I can remember just crying out to the Lord for that situation. And I was like, all I could say, it was one of those moments where just the words wouldn't come. Like I couldn't come up with this big, long, lengthy prayer. And all I could say was, I just said, Lord, please let him live long enough to hold
Mhm.
his first grandchild in his arms. That was all I could pray. And and so the Lord ended up healing him, and not only did he live long enough to hold that first grandchild, but the Lord multiplied the prayer. So he lived to hold all of his grandchildren, um, which was pretty amazing, to see that years later. It was like, thank you, Lord. Thank you for
Wow.
answering that prayer.
But doesn't that, and this is you speak like this, and I think it's so beautiful, and especially when you were telling the story about your dad, and then years later, and your mum obviously trying to protect you
Yeah.
from, and I think that in itself is beautiful. But what I really love, and again, to me, the power of communication
Hmm.
creates miracles,
Yeah.
because just by saying that to your dad and he's going, no, well, I think you should ask mum, and mum saying, well,
Hmm.
I didn't want anything to happen to you, and you going, oh, that's what it was. So even if
Right.
you're 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, and some the people like your parents, it wasn't secondhand from anyone. They
Hmm.
told you directly. So it was their truth, and you were able to heal. It's not like you said, oh, well, you should have. And if only you had told me, I wouldn't have
Right.
spent the next 30 years being miserable or whatever. It was in that moment, realizing the truth and the understanding and the love with which that was done, which we so often misunderstand, right? And we have
Hmm.
an idea that's not really the truth. But the minute we hear the truth, our spirit recognizes it, right?
Yeah.
And that's where the healing is. So the power of healing lies within communicating truthfully and honestly in these
Right.
situations. Because for me, that's what I'm seeing here is the miracle. And like I was saying earlier on, if you have issues with your children or there's anything you need to say, a family member, anything, just do it. It's going to
Right.
create so much joy, actually, peace, peace, joy.
Yeah.
Hmm. I love
Yep.
that. I
And
love
not
what you
being
said.
afraid to be vulnerable with each other.
Absolutely,
That's part of it, is that entering into that place of vulnerability, you know.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because so often we tend to think, when we talk about a miracle, and that's something I wanted to actually say at the beginning, chat to you about that, but we may as well just stick it in here now. This is us in Africa, we just do things. But it's like a miracle doesn't have to be something like you experienced, with having the vehicle just about crush you and there's nothing
Mhm.
there. That's just God like giving you a little bit of telling you, listen, I'm much more powerful. You may as well just surrender. So
Right?
it doesn't have to be that type of miracle where it really is like, wow. I mean, I've seen people have very bad, or heard of people, I haven't seen it, motorbike accidents, for example,
Mhm.
and they just fly off slow motion and land on the perfect bush without even a bruise on the coccyx.
Right.
So that's a miracle, of course. But there are other types of miracles as well. And it's like what
Yeah.
we're talking, even the little ones, when your baby takes its first step, that's a
Mhm.
miracle to be celebrated. Like
Right.
what you're saying about the little girl, was it the little girl or the boy that was praying for the first time at the age of 5? I
Right.
mean, what a
Yeah.
miracle. You see, little things like this. I just think there's so many different types of miracles, and we need to celebrate them all, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely there's, little things and, then there's the bigger ones that, we really stand in awe about. And those are the ones that were made, we're made to testify to these miracles. They're part of our story that shows forth the power of God in our lives. And, you know, w- um, one of the other ones for me was at age 17. Before that, I had really bad asthma, and it was so bad at times that, like, I wasn't able to really participate in sports or other things. Um, I had to back off from those things, and that asthma started at about age 10. So um, after I had gone through my training and my time in the system, I got out, and then that's when I got hit with that asthma. And so anyway, I had gone to a concert, and you'll like this. The name of the band was called Hellfighters. So that still cracks me up. Um, but they were probably one of the first groups that I ever heard about who were talking about, spiritual warfare openly. And so, I was really invested in this group and went to their concert. And there was about 500 kids in the sanctuary and at the church service for that. And as they were singing, we were all just worshiping, praising the Lord. So at one point, the lead singer, he all of a sudden he just, really started pouring his heart out before the Lord, and he just lifted both his hands up in the air and started worshiping the Lord. And as he did that, like, all of us, like, I can't even explain it because it wasn't coordinated. We didn't turn to one another and say, "Let's bow down." It was just like everybody all of a sudden just went face forward, bowing down before the Lord, and we all started worshiping the Lord. And as I was down there on my hands and knees worshiping the Lord, clear as day, he says to me, "I've taken your asthma away." And from that day until the day I got poisoned, I never had a single issue with my lungs. So,
Wow.
and now I'm fighting for that miracle still. It's like I've been saying to the enemy, you don't get to take my miracle from me. The Lord healed me. He healed my lungs, and I'm going to stick with that. So,
Absolutely. Wow. But that, there again, I mean, that's another one of these incredible miracles. And it's the power of belief, right? If we look
yeah,
at Jesus, who was the most supreme healer, right?
right.
Um, and there was, in my mind, two things that enabled people to be healed by Jesus. They had to believe that they were worthy and that it was possible, right? So
Right.
it was like really wanting and understanding this miracle in itself, um, of being healed, but then also him seeing them in their perfect light. So he never saw them as sick or full of disease or whatever. He only saw them in the light of God. And that is how Jesus was able to heal people. So fundamentally, even if you look at it like that, it's really about belief and faith, right? Belief that it's possible and faith that it will happen, not can happen, but will happen, right?
Yeah, I mean, one of the other ones that, seems like a lesser one, but really was very mighty in my life was, as a kid, after everything I had experienced, I had this, very intense anger, and it just burned. Like, that's all I'll say is, that anger was so intense, it burned. Um, and I was just crying out for justice, for vengeance, not in a bad way, but it was just like, Lord, I'm just so mad about everything that happened. And that anger would come out where, I had certain individuals in my family that were button pushers. And, I just couldn't, like, I'll admit I yelled. That was probably the biggest way the anger came out, was that I would yell. But particularly towards this one relative, when she started poking and pushing those buttons, it was like I lost it. It was like I was so mad. She got the venting and the rage of my anger. But it got to a point where, I knew that it was unhealthy. I knew that I just couldn't continue at that state. And I started to pray and ask the Lord to take the anger away. And when I came with that surrender, it probably was a about a year process where I just continually, every time I had that intense anger, it was like, Lord, take it away, take it from me. And one day, I was standing there in our kitchen, and, most of the things that made me really mad were that, this relative, she would make me late for school a lot. And when I was late, like her classroom was like right as you right as you came in from the parking lot, but mine was all the way across the school. So when we were late, like I would get detention because of her. So that made me even madder because it was something, like I didn't deserve. And so, I had that was most of what we fought about, and I had got to the point where it's like, "I'm gonna leave without you," and, my mom had told me I couldn't do that. So, the one morning, I'm standing there in the kitchen, and all of a sudden, it was like, I'm getting mad because we're supposed to be leaving, I know I'm gonna be late again, and all of a sudden, I just feel that anger just lift. And it was like, I just remember taking a breath, and it was like, wow, it's gone. Like,
Oh,
I don't care. Like, I'm not mad anymore. And I said, what do I need to do to help you get ready so we're not late? And that was where we had a shift, where I realized if I started, using the time to help her instead of being mad and yelling, that then, you know, that worked things out. So sometimes God, I encourage people with emotions, whether it's depression, anger, sadness, if you know that, you know, your emotions are out of control, there's a surrender there that needs to happen, and allowing the Lord to be Lord over everything, every area of your life.
absolutely. And I think you've hit the nail on the head there when you talk about surrender, because surrender, that surrendering isn't it? Wouldn't you say it's almost like a point of taking responsibility, actually, where you
Right?
can You're not blaming someone else and saying, God, stop him, stop him, stop him. He's doing this, he's
Right,
doing this, he's doing this, right? God's
right.
not going to stop that. But you can come to a point where you actually say, okay, God,
I
help
need to
me out
change.
of this.
Yeah,
Yes, help me, show me the way forward here. Show me how not to get entangled in this web of lies all the time.
right.
And then in that way you own the fact that you're allowing yourself through your own actions to be involved in something that's unpleasant, and the
Yeah.
acknowledgement of that, but then at the same time you're asking for help to get out. And that, I think, is a very important thing, don't you think? To actually own
Absolutely.
that. And in that way, you are then working with God to get you
Mhm.
out of that situation. And then God does not have to knock you down with a truck, Jesse.
Right? I mean, the stories I could tell you, Chantel, about my arguments with God. We'll have to make that another show.
God just has to show you who's boss every now and again, right?
He does, for sure. So, yes. But
So yeah, I think that's so relevant. I really do, and I love what you're saying, because really, at the end of the day, miracles will come our way when we believe we're worthy of them, and we believe
yeah,
they're available to us, and
and we
that
surrender
we
that control.
absolutely,
The truth is that,
absolutely,
we all have situations where we don't have control and we realize that, we can't um, change the situation. We can't make something different happen. We really are just at the mercy of watching what the Lord is about to do. So, I learned that so powerfully in my chaplain work, especially when I was working in the NICUs and pediatrics. And one of the NICU was so powerful. Um, my first week there, I was a resident student, so I was underneath another chaplain. And all of a sudden, I hear her come running down the hallway. She bustles into, the student room and she's like, come with me now. And we're running like, through these hospital hallways. And we get into this delivery room and she's like, you stand right there in that corner. Don't move. Just watch. And it was like, okay, all right, what are we in for? Well, what had happened was that, it was a mom who had been pregnant with twins, and it was the type of thing where the one twin is getting all the nutrients and the other is not. And so, in order to save both of these babies, they had to, deliver them at 24 weeks, which is that, um, you know, they're very fragile at 24 weeks. And, so, I watch as they bring in these 2 little babies that literally, like, fit in the palm of your hand, and, that was the first time I had seen such a little baby that was alive, and I'm watching. I was right next to the table with the smallest one, so he wasn't even a pound. And this little guy, like, as the doctors are leaning over him trying to do stuff, he's reaching up and he got a hold of the one doctor's button on his jacket and he's just hanging on to that button. And he's actually like healing with his other hand. And I was sitting there like, wow, like I did not even know at that little that they could fight like that. I mean, he was a little fighter. And
wow.
I was just praying life over them. And he was the one, he had the hardest time out of the two of them and ended up with a lot of health issues. But as I prayed, it was interesting that, he was in that NICU for over 6 months. And then, I got to watch the day as he graduated and went home. So that was really exciting to see that, that life, because all I had ever seen as a kid was just the nonstop death, and the horrific things. But I was like, wow, what a little, you know, that little miracle who those tiny little fingers grabbing hold of that button, with his hands. And
Wow.
so, and the Lord, that was probably the other significant one. He had been a little guy that his mom was a prisoner, and I was really horrified to see what happens to women who are in prisons when they deliver babies. I know that they have to take safety and precautions, but still being a first time person observing that, I just kept thinking, man, I've had 6 babies. One of them I had to deliver on laying on my side because of the way the cord was. And I was like, that was such a tough thing. I could not imagine being a prison woman, having to be chained to the bed, not being able to move or, you know, get into a position that's comfortable for you while you're delivering a baby. And, they'll have them chained to the bed. And you've got so many people in there in the room. But this woman, you know they had done tests early on because there were some complications with her pregnancy, and they knew that the baby, they called him a heart baby, he had heart issues, and his heart was completely wired backwards. So that meant that everything was not flowing as it should. It was all flowing the wrong way. So, early on in her pregnancy, they had encouraged her to abort the baby, and she kept saying no, knowing that after she delivered the baby, that um, he would be taken from her if he lived, And so, I can remember attending meetings. They kept saying, this baby's not going to survive the delivery, get ready, we're going to have to provide grief and all these other things because he's probably going to be born stillborn, and that's going to be really hard for the mom to see that. And so they were giving all this preparatory stuff for him. And anyway, the day he was born, guess what? He was born alive, and alive and screaming, with lungs that were very well capacitated. And the staff were just like, what is happening? Like, this shouldn't be. Like, how is he even surviving? And so the answered prayer there was that the mom got to enjoy her baby. Now, he didn't die. So they ended up having to come up with a whole nother plan at the hospital. They had to call in grandma, who then ended up taking the baby home because the mom, was a prisoner and had to go back. So I can remember, all of that. And I just prayed for life for that little guy. And I never thought that I would see him again, but I did. I ended up 6 months later. The Lord allowed me to see the completion of his miracle. And sometimes miracles don't look like what our hearts desire, you know? Um, but 6 months later, I got called up to pediatrics, and they had an infant that was coding, meaning that they were resuscitating and trying to do stuff. And I walk up there and I see this little guy, and his first name was what gave it away. He had a very distinct first name, which I'm not going to say here, but they had changed his last name. So at first I was like, huh, it's odd that there's another child with that name. And then as I'm reading the chart, I'm seeing, this is a heart baby. He's got the same condition the one I knew had. And it was like, this has to be the same kid. And it was. It ended up they had changed to his father's last name. But I got to be there ministering to him as he took his last breath. But I, sat there looking at both his father and his grandmother, and just all I could do was praise the Lord that they had, this was a baby that they had condemned to death before he was even born, and yet his family got to experience him alive. They got to spend time with him, and his heart the entire time, his heart worked completely backwards. So, um, you know,
Wow.
God just put all of those medical people, you know, all they could do was stand in awe because they had no explanation for those miracles of how that child was surviving for those 6 months.
That's amazing.
It just shows us, God's powers are so supreme, and so, I mean, what is the word? There is no word for it. It's just, why do we even doubt it to begin with? I guess that's what I'm trying to say, and all of us do. I mean, myself included. Definitely there'll be times, I mean, what are you scared of, Chantal? Isn't that you? And then I've got to like talk myself into that again.
Right.
But when we realize just that, as you say, by surrendering and just expecting a miracle, expecting
Yeah.
something wonderful to happen, like that little baby. I mean, my God, who would have thought? And there he is on extra bonus life, being cute and alive and there for the rest of his family, that they have some memories to share
Right.
and stories to talk about to the rest of the grandkids that come along. You know,
Yeah.
I just think that's so beautiful. That
Uh,
to me is a true miracle.
Absolutely. And I got one more for you. This was
I
probably,
love it.
again, another powerful one, but I had two experiences in the hospital where I directly watched the Lord raise people from the dead. Um, so one of them, it just was a interesting situation from the start. I have to laugh thinking back because at the time, I was doing it was part of my residency program, and I would have to do these on-call shifts, and you know, I pretty much did on-calls either 2 or 3 nights a week, and sometimes, my shifts, I was going for 24 hours straight, and, it got pretty long and hard. But I had this one nurse that the charge nurse for the ICU, she would not like, like other ones, they'd be like, "Oh, chaplain, can you come in? And this is where you need to come. We're calling from this unit." But she wasn't like that. She was kind of your gruff, gritty type woman. And I'd pick up the phone. I'd be like, "Hello," and she'd be like, "Get your ass in here now," and I'd be like, and it'd be click, like there wouldn't even be time to ask questions. And I'd be like, well, that probably was the ER or the ICU. So I'll head to the ICU first. And so I'd get there and she'd be like, you know, da 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 da. And that was like all she'd say. So that night I got there and she goes, "Chaplain, the family says that they want you to get the patient saved. And I'm sure you know exactly what that means." And I'm like, "Oh, okay. All right." And so I started heading to the room, and I thought the family was going to be there. I thought it was one of those I'd get these situations all the time where, a patient would be dying or nearing death, and the family, would be concerned about their eternal state of affairs. And, they'd be calling in the chaplain to come and get the patient saved before they died. But then you'd have the patient who didn't want to be saved, and you get these fights and these arguments, and it's like, well, I can't make them take Jesus. I can't make them, you know care about this, or all I can do is just share what I can share. So I was expecting that type of situation, but as I got to the room, not only was there no family, but the patient was completely non-responsive, lying in the bed on a ventilator. And it was like, huh. Okay, well, how do you get the patient saved for the family's sake when they can't even respond or anything like that? But I always remembered, and I do believe that people, even if they're non-responsive, it doesn't mean that they can't hear or that they can't
Absolutely.
communicate in some way. So I sat down, next to his bed, and usually in those cases what I do is I just start to sing. And so I just started to sing to him and, hold his hand and talk to him and stuff. And I did that for a couple hours actually. And at the end of that second hour, all of a sudden I see this vision, and I see literally the hand of God come down, and the Lord just like gently stroked his face. And I just burst out bawling because I mean, I can't even describe the love that
Mm.
I witnessed. And I was just like, wow, Lord, you are with him. You're with him. And so I left the room that day. I went to the charge nurse and I said, when family comes or when they call, just tell them the Lord is with him. And I had that assurance because I had seen it. Well, the next day I get called back and they're like, you need to come, chaplain, now and like fix this. And it's like, fix what? And the guy was supposed to have died, but he didn't. So I get there, not only is he not dead, but he's pulled out his ventilator, he's sitting up, and he's trying to communicate with the doctors. And, I see kind of what he's doing, and I said, well, does anybody have a pen and paper? And so we got him a pen and paper, and, he was trying to write, but he had been unconscious for several days, so it was really hard, like, I was trying to decipher, and as I would ask, he'd be like, "No, no," and it was like, "Okay, let's keep guessing," you know? So word for word, we put together this sentence, and at the end, the sentence said, "Tell the doctors I want to live." And so I shared that with the doctors, and they're like, "Wait, what?" They're like, "This guy is a do not resuscitate, so does he want us to change that status?" And I looked at him, I said, "Do you want it changed?" And he was like, "Yes." And they're like, "Okay, but he wants us to resuscitate him now?" And it's like, "I guess so." And so he changed his status order. Now, he didn't die. So he ended up going home. The whole year, I never saw him back. So as far as I know, the Lord healed him and he didn't die. And so that was a very interesting situation.
That's amazing.
Wow. That is
Yeah,
amazing. That is amazing. And it just shows you how the power of prayer, right? The power of prayer. And how incredible that is, because prayer really does create miracles. Really, really,
absolutely.
really.
Yeah.
I mean, that's incredible. Wow. I absolutely love these stories. Are you sure you don't have one more you can sneak in
Sure,
before we
I
have
can
to go?
tell the other one. So the other one was really funny because, in that chaplain training residency program, you have a group of, I think there was like 5 or 6 of us um, that were all studying together to be chaplains. And we're talking a big hospital, the second hospital residency program I did was, a what were they had 4 different levels of trauma care, but they had like a burn unit, they had a NICU, pediatrics, they had 2 IC or ERs and ICUs, um, 9-story hospital. From one side of the campus to the other was a 5-mile walk. So, as a chaplain, we'd get called from one place to the other and we'd be booking it, to make it to some of these situations. Um, so in that training, we worked through to help each other to grow in the areas where we needed to grow. one of the areas that they picked up on for me right away was that, I did not like to enter into situations touching other people. I would stand there and say, "Oh, would you like prayer?" And they're like, "No, no, you need to at least like touch their hand, touch their shoulder." Like they're like, "Why don't you like touching people?" And it's like, "Well, I can't really share why I don't like touching people, but especially dead people, but I guess, I'll work on it." So I began to really try to work on it. And one of the nurses, this was another one, she was just very humorous. Um, but so anyway, she had called me up to this situation with a family where they were coding the husband and trying to resuscitate him. And they wanted me to be there with the wife. And so I get up to the room, and several nurses and staff are standing outside as they're coding inside the room. And this wife is literally like wrapped around the nurse's neck, like bawling. And so the nurse sees me, literally peels the woman's arms off and puts them around me, who doesn't even, I have this personal space I like to keep. And it's just like all of a sudden I've got this woman, and it's like, oh, hello, I'm the chaplain. It's like, well, here we are. But this woman wasn't like a normal, or I'll take that back. I kind of said it wrong, but I guess, for me, I'm used to people who have space boundaries. She was one of those that, she wasn't defined by space, and so she didn't let go. Like she just kept like hanging on to me. And so I'm sitting there like, how can I, help this situation out, because this really isn't working out for me, And so I said to her, I said, "Would you like to be in the room?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Okay," and I told the staff who were working on her husband, I said, "We're going to come in and we're going to stand at the foot of the bed." And with that, there's special precautions. As you're doing this, you have to be, communicating a lot with the family. So I had to say to her, because they're, using the charger to bring him back and stuff, like don't touch the bed. Like you can't put your hands on him or the bed, but we can stand together and watch and pray. And so we're standing there watching and praying. And so at, one point they have, where his heart's going. And uh, the doctor turns to the wife and says, "Well, if his heart stops again, do you want us to keep going?" Now, at that point, they had already been going for a couple hours, which usually, um, usually anything past 30 minutes, and you're not going to have any type of quality of life for that individual coming back. So not only had they been going for a couple hours, but they also, like I was looking at they'll always have medication poles um, that they have the patient hooked up to. And, typically you'll see one pole that can hold up to 10 medications, but they had like several poles that were all maxed out with medications. So this guy is heavily sedated. Um, there's not, even if I'll just say there's not a chance that he's going to be conscious at all of anything that's happening, especially after 2 hours of being coded, right? But so the doctor asked the wife, "Do you want us to keep going?" And what does the wife do? The wife goes up to the head of the bed, kneels down, puts her hand on the guy, and says, "Honey, if your heart stops again, do you want them to keep going?" And it's one of those moments where I'm sitting there like, he's not gonna respond, right? But all of a sudden he opens his eyes
Wow.
and he says, "Yes, tell them to keep going." And all of the nurses and doctors are like, because we all
Wow.
know there's no way he should be responding. They all like, get these looks, and the one male nurse looks at me and he goes, "Chaplain, what the hell just happened?" And I was like, "I think you just saw a miracle." And
Wow.
what was special about that was that they had 3 children, and, it was Christmas time. And so the Lord heard our prayers, and he came back to life. He was able to live. He was able to, he had to do Christmas there in the hospital with his kids, but he got to do one last Christmas with his kids before the Lord took him home. So,
Wow.
very powerful miracle.
That's amazing.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is amazing. That is incredible. Oh, what beautiful stories. I mean, wow, today's been such a contrast, hasn't it? From our
Yeah.
show earlier on with all that gruesome stuff
The heaviness
to,
and
I
yeah,
feel much
and
better now. I feel much
yeah,
better.
absolutely. I think we all needed this. I kind of had a feeling because we were originally going to put solutions first and Aquarius rising later. I went, I don't think so today. I think we should
right,
go.
good call. Yep, good
Yeah,
call.
absolutely. Anyway, for those of you who haven't didn't watch our previous show, we did the Balenciaga decode with Jessie, but not just that, also just on the head designer. I know she's the head designer. Um, what's her name? Lotta Volkova, right? Is that her name?
Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah.
Volkova.
And yeah, just very dark, very depraved, and very heartbreaking to see that these are the people that are behind all these beautiful garments and gowns that the world is so sucked in by. Let's see more of that. Let's see more exposure around these things. Jessie, thank you so, so much. I
Yeah,
know we've taken 2 hours
welcome.
of your time today, and we're very, very happy and very grateful to have you back. I know you haven't been that well, and you had a little time out, and I'm very happy that obviously all our viewers are very grateful and very excited to see
They
you back.
love me. Yeah, that's great. They all were checking in, so I appreciate that.
Certainly, I had so many emails, so many comments. When Jessie Kirkman, when I'm like, hello, what about me? Are you not? Don't you care that I might be around or not?
So what I'm hearing is Chantel needs love this week. So let's love
Yes,
bomb Chantel.
just love Bobby, everybody. Ah, delightful. And excited to have you back on Sunday again with Patreon.
That's
At
right.
it'll be 4 p.m. our time, which is the same time we started
I
now.
think it's still 9 p.m. Eastern our time.
Okay, so 4 p.m. for South Africa and GMT +2 and 9 p.m. for you guys. Sunday coming up, we've got beautiful 5 minutes of grief with God. Jessie going through her incredible book and just assisting everyone with some beautiful healing, as always. God bless you, Jessie. We just love
Thank
you.
you.
Won't you please just say a prayer for us, Paul? Thank you.
Absolutely. Heavenly Father, we just thank you for the greatness of your power. We thank you for your love because really that's what miracles are. They are signs of your love for us. And you just do so many marvelous and wondrous things that we can't even imagine. And I pray that for each individual here that they would begin to see and witness the power of your might, that you would work miracles all throughout their life, whether it's in their relationships, whether it's in their situations, whether it's with their vehicles or their property, Lord. We ask that we may just see your mighty hand move and that we would have joy and laughter in sharing the stories about the miraculous things that you do. We ask this in your powerful name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Wow. Thank you, Jess. Thanks,
Yeah,
Mornay.
thank you.
Thank you, everybody. It's been wonderful. I've loved this afternoon, morning, afternoon. I mean, okay, I'm saying afternoon. This afternoon show. It's been amazing and really, as I said, so uplifting after the dark stuff we talk about. Thank you, Jess. We look forward to seeing you on
You.
Sunday. Thanks, guys. If you haven't already, please like, share, subscribe. and just share this beautiful miracle that Jessie is talking about. She's our miracle. Had many miracles. We all have miracles every day. Recognize yours. Yes. Thanks, guys. Mwah.
Yeah.
Take good care of yourselves. God bless you all.
Hello.
Well, hello again, everybody. Welcome back to Double Dose Wednesday with Jessie. What a pleasure it is to have these days, Jess, that you
Thank
give
you.
us a double dose of you. Welcome back. Thank you so much. How are you in the last half an hour?
Oh, the last half an hour, I got into so many shenanigans, I can't even start anywhere. I'm just kidding.
I know your type, girlfriend. I know your type, that's for sure. Shenanigans is your middle name.
Right?
Well, we just had you on a beautiful show on Aquarius Rising Africa,
Yeah,
talking about the inside of the castles and some of the stuff that goes down there. It was really fun and quite enlightening as well. I want to dig more into that as well. I'm sure there's so much more that we
yes,
can look at there, right? So I'm sure we'll be doing more of that next week as well as the white rabbit, which we didn't get to today, guys. So don't be
right?
mortified. That's coming up next week as well. But very, very, very important show today is talking about the importance of survivors and overcomers bringing forth your testimonies. Wow. I know from the last 2 and a bit years that we've been doing this show, and Jessie, you were our first guest. You were the one that inspired us to do what we're doing, most definitely. And through that, both Morna and myself have gotten to meet the most incredible people,
Hmm.
the strongest, most amazing survivors and overcomers. These are the strongest spirits I have ever encountered in my life. And not only the ones speaking up on the platforms, also the ones that I speak to privately and who just send emails or communicate in the chat. It is just such a beautiful thing to see how many people are now speaking up and speaking out. And there's our beautiful Andy Bond in the chat as well, another one of our beautiful survivors and overcomers as well. And it's just amazing to hear the testimonies. And I mean, Jessie, firsthand the backlash
Hmm.
of putting out your testimony. Now, honestly, you are certainly one of the bravest human beings I have encountered in my life, and it's an absolute pleasure to know you. One day we'll get to hug you. I'm going to hug and squeeze you so tight you're not going to be able to breathe for 3 seconds.
I can't wait for that day. That'll be
Oh, me
great.
too. Yeah, amen to that.
Just sit
Absolutely.
there.
Just 3
I'll have
seconds.
a
That's
picture up there with me and the little feet thing.
just like
I see it.
anyway, so please tell us, you've also inspired so many people to speak out and come forth. And I've loved this process, really. For me, this is why I do this. We often speak about why we do this. I have never been involved in the system. I don't know anyone who has been, to be perfectly honest. This is just a passion. It's something that Morna and I really just love to do, and just love to meet people like yourself who can speak about this and bring it forth. And so please tell us how to be brave like you and just not fear the backlash.
I don't know if it's so much bravery as more of a willingness to be obedient.
Yeah.
I had, for me, it started even at a young age. So I would say there's different progressions of, coming to that place of sharing my own testimony. As a kid, I was just always trying to tell, and it started with just simple sentences, where I would say, my family's in the occult, or My family kills babies. Um, but with that, I found people were not responsive to that. And so as I got older, and I began going to Bible colleges or different, it started actually before Bible college as I did training with the Child Evangelism Fellowship. Um, as they taught me how to go out in evangelism, that was part of that was learning how to tell my story. So, I began to look at, what are the main points that I could share out of my life. And, the truth was that, when we have horrific traumas, horrific experiences, the majority of people don't want to hear that. And the truth about that is not because they don't want to hear the evil part, it's because they don't want to hear what brings up their own gunk and trauma and pain.
Absolutely.
And so they will automatically shut you down because they're not willing to come to that place to acknowledge their own. Um, so, you know, I kind of had learned to give what I call this watered down version of my story, where I just in general would say, you know, the occult is real, it's here in America. My family was a part of that. Um, I witnessed horrific things. And then I would get into, and here's what the Lord's done in my life. And that's what people wanted to hear. So, as I got further along in that journey, the Lord began to, get very, I'll just say firm, where, he was bringing me to that place where he wanted the fullness of my testimony to come out. And he did give me a direct command on that. I was going to do my chaplain work that day at a shelter, and I often would ride the bus with the people that we were picking up and bringing to the shelter, and then I would do the processing classes. So I was riding that bus to pick up the people for the shelter, and just clear as day, the Lord said to me, "You're going to give your testimony." And I knew when he said that it wasn't that watered down version. I had no idea of all the doors he was going to open up for me or all the avenues. Um, but I had to make that, come to that place, I guess, of surrender with him. Um, at first, and I know many survivors that this is going to resonate with you, but when we really make that choice to come out fully, um, there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of, we have to overcome, I guess, I don't even know what to call it, but for me, I called it that silence, that code of silence. And so many of us, especially if our trauma was out of, the Luciferian Brotherhood system, you know, that's what they ingrain on us, is that silence is an unbreakable vow, that if you break it, it comes at the cost of death. And there comes that moment where we have to, acknowledge that the system and those in the system are not in control of our death, and they're not in control of our life. And, I fully believed the the truths out of scripture where, it says in Romans 6 that we have died with Christ and we've been raised to new life with him. So if I have that life, I want to live it. So that's really what, is kind of the, um, we'll say the kind of the, what would you call it? The energy, the strength, um, that's behind our decision, is that we have been given the God-given right to live. And so we have to make that choice. Are we going to remain in that place of death and silence? Or are we going to allow our voices to come forth and truly live and experience that freedom? that we all have. And so, part of that is coming to that place where we believe that we have that life, and we believe that nothing has control over our death but God.
Exactly.
And, that's where some of that programming, for those who have been programmed, that system trained your body to be held captive under that fear of death. And, we're afraid that if we begin to tell, parts of our body start to react, um, and, those triggers set off things that then make us feel like we are going to die if we continue. Um, for me, one of those things is the potassium. I've been through all sorts of specialists, and they cannot figure out why my body will just all of a sudden randomly, you know, use all the potassiums that's there, and then I'll get, my heart will start racing. I'll feel like I'm going to have a heart attack. Um, and that's part of that trigger response in the body, and I had to learn to overcome that. I had to learn to speak life to my body, to say, you know, I shall not die, but I shall live to declare the glory of the Lord in the land of the living. That's a great verse that many of you can utilize. Um, and we have to learn to, work through, really it's a struggle, it's a fight.
I think
And there's a difference. Go ahead, I'll let you with your question, but I want to get into the difference between, um, like there's some people who have actually been programmed for different things in the system, but that is different than what I'm speaking about when I say, like, we have to overcome those triggers. Um, triggers are a trained response that, our bodies are trained to respond in a certain way. And it's different than a program because, a program you may not necessarily have mental or, emotional or spiritual control over. The triggers are specifically, it's training the body to react to certain emotional responses, which then, every time you experience a certain situation, it floods in that emotional response, which then activates the trigger. Um, so there's a little bit of a difference there, and we do have control over those triggers, even though we're taught to believe that we don't. So,
I think that is so important what you're saying. The first step, I think, as a survivor, wanting to step forward and share your testimony, and obviously have a lot of fear around the lives, your life, your loved ones' lives, etc.
mhm,
The first thing, Jess, I think I heard you say that is so important, is that only God has the right or authority to give you life and to take your life.
right.
So even if you should lose your life, it would be you going back to God.
Yeah.
That's the way I see that, and not a failure or a whatever the case might be. Obviously, we human beings, we seek to thrive and live, and no one wants to come to any harm. But I really think it's the belief, the trust, the knowing that you've been through this experience and you've come through it. If you are remotely tempted to tell your story, then it's probably a yes, which means yes, step forward, know that you're safe, know that you're protected, know that only God has the right, or the authority rather. Right sounds like the
Yeah.
Lucy's, the authority to give or take your life at any given time. And which means that it would be a sacred agreement, just like it's a sacred agreement between you and God to be here. in this place, it would also be a sacred agreement between your soul and God to leave when you do, right?
Right.
That's the way I see that. So I think that would be the first thing. And I love what you said there.
Yeah, and so, breaking through, really what's being attacked or, so it's not something that they ingrain, I'm trying to think of a way to explain exactly what I'm getting into. But what the system has targeted is our belief system. They want us to believe that they have the power, the authority, um, and so, what do they use to shift our belief? They use fear primarily or intense torture, which causes anger. And your body learns to respond to that fear through those different reactions. Some of the things that I've seen that, they have done is, messing with the heart so that, like for me, I can remember things where they would, hold me down. They would pin me into a straight jacket so I couldn't fight them. And then, shoot me up with different, uh, we'll just say drugs. It wasn't all like drugs. We're talking things like adrenochrome, tetracycline, um, and and so then, it's like my body would be having these auto reactions that I couldn't control. And as my heart, the tetracycline would cause the potassium to drop. And you also have then a double whammy because the adrenochrome also, like when your adrenals are working at high level, everything in your body is overreactive and is using up all that potassium as well. So then, the heart responds by going faster because it thinks it's in a dangerous situation. And in those moments then, they would be telling me that I was gonna die, that if I didn't, comply, I'm gonna die. So then, that became kind of that background thought where every time my heart races, I feel like I'm gonna die. And, we have to come to that point where we acknowledge that the things that they told us in those moments were lies. Um, what is the truth? Yes, my body is reacting, but in our current situations, are we really in that unsafe environment? For the majority of us, we're not. Um, we feel like which part, there's a truth to it. For some of the high level survivors, we are constantly watched and monitored. So, that's true, and so that's part of that fear then, where we feel like if we speak out that they are gonna come, they are gonna show up, and they're going to, attempt to kill us. Um, but for that, how I overcame that was, I began to speak out the truths that I believed. I believe God is all sovereign. I believe he's powerful. I believe his name is a strong tower. Um, you know, that tower is impenetrable by anybody. As long as I'm in his name, I am safe, I am protected. And he does know the day of my death because his word says he formed the days for me, and he's prepared good works within those days for me to do. So I believe that, all those things are in place. I believe that I have new life. What comes with that new life? Uh, I am a son of the living God. I have the full authority of Jesus Christ because he's given it to me. He's given it to all of us. And that authority means that we can speak forth life into our situations. Um, and how do we speak forth that life or what is life? It's by speaking forth that truth in the Word of God. That's where the life is. it's about proclaiming, that resurrection power that all of us have as the Holy Spirit lives through us. So, those are things as we start to speak those things, in those moments when the fear comes, um, we need to be asking, what does my body need right now, um, in order to overcome? So, and I can't explain exactly how those auto responses of the body work. I just know that it's something that we experience. And here's the thing is that, you know, we need to be sensitive to others as they're coming out because all of us have those auto reactions, our physical body reacts. And it's really difficult, especially the first, few times somebody's coming out and beginning to share the depth of that pain, that sorrow, the abuse, um, torture. you know, Sometimes they can't even use the right words, they may not even know how to put their experience into words. And that was part of my issue. Um, you know, there were things that I didn't have words for. I didn't know how to describe to people, the depths of all that I had experienced. And a lot of my processings literally rely on many of the shows that I do. Before the shows, I had never, I hadn't been out publicly speaking about it or, sharing with other people. My processing of those events was live with the world. And, for me, that actually, there was a freedom in that because it's like, okay, if I'm telling, just everybody is going to hear. So it's like I'm taking that risk, and if the enemy's going to come against me, at least all these people are going to know. So it's not like other survivors will understand this, but like when I was a kid, there was that risk that if you shared with someone, that someone would end up dead. And that was a threat. You were always afraid that if you told somebody, they would end up dead. Um, so by having multiple people on platforms, there's really no way for the system to control that as our voices start to come out.
Absolutely.
They can't get away with it with taking out, that many people at one time who are in different parts of the world whose only connection is watching the show where the survivors spoke out. So there's
It's
a
like
safety in that.
little seeds popping up all over from all over the world, right?
Right. And
As
the more that our stories are shared, you know, there's a safety in that for many of
yes,
the survivors. So I really, applaud those who have come forward on different platforms, and, you know, that's a wise decision. There's more safety in that. Um, you know, and I want to kind of get into the logistics. People think, well, where do I start with my story? For me, it helped to kind of start in that place of where the Lord first really started speaking to my heart at age 2. Um, for me, it's easier to connect with my testimony and share it as stories, just because it's easier to follow that way. And I found, sometimes, or I'll just say it's much easier to think topically because then you're focused on, several different situations that revolve around the same topic versus necessarily going in chronological order. Because for many of us, there was just so much packed into that chronological order that it's easier to recall or focus on events or like I said, the topical, um, because the truth is we hold this mass amount of information. Um, the majority of survivors there's just so much, and it can be overwhelming, thinking of things chronologically because you're like, there's just so much. Where do I even begin to start where it makes sense to people? And that was part of my goal was that I needed, as my testimony came forward, not just to share it, I needed it to make sense. I needed people to understand. I needed people to connect with it so they could understand the vastness of how this system works and, exactly what is happening, not just, or what happened not just to me, but what is continuing to happen across the world to, hundreds of thousands of children every year,
Absolutely.
because we needed to stop it.
Hmm.
So, those are decisions we have to make. How are we going to tell our story and where do we start? Um, it really helped for me to have it more interview style where people were asking questions. That gave me places to focus and control over um, how much of the details I'm going to share. Um, I want to give permission to everybody out there who's listening to say that you can choose. You don't have to um, go into the pits of the depth of the pain, the torture, the suffering. Um, you can find ways to share pieces of those parts of your story without going into all the gory details. At the same time, I encourage you to not just give people the milk of your testimony. You want to, there's a healing that comes from breaking that silence and getting into the depths of it. Um, but as you start to do that, know that you don't have to give, the whole ocean full at the first
Yeah.
go. You can build up. You can
Yeah.
give pieces and build in and even go back later where you're filling in more details as you're more comfortable sharing your story. Um, and I think sometimes that's where, we go wrong, especially with, I'll just say that there are very skilled harassers and operatives out there. Their goal and purpose is to silence our testimonies, to not allow them to go forward. Their job is to discredit. Um, this is an age-old game in the system. Even in my own family life, I would watch as, like I knew the truth. I knew what our family did. I had been there. I remembered. My memory wasn't erased. In fact, there were things that I did to purposely ensure they couldn't take some of those horrific memories because I wanted um, that justice. I wanted, um, to be avenged for some of the things that had happened. And so, I would recite details of different events over and over in my mind between me and my training partner. We would question each other randomly every day. Um, and we knew that if the person couldn't answer that question, that most likely the system had gotten to them and programmed them. So that was part of why we did that, was to make sure that we weren't programmed or that our memories weren't being erased. Um, so, with that, we keep pressing forward with that story, breaking that silence, breaking through, um, those details and building on um, finding different ways to express the story that we've been given. Um, for me, it helped coming up with different words and acknowledging the truth because, as we were saying, um, in the system, they play those mind games. I would have, there were several times I was in a ritual, and then, one of the other children would be having trouble. And like one of the incidents that I've talked about it before in a previous show, when I think it was the one where we talked about the virtue squad. So, one of the little girls started, yelling and screaming and saying that the priest had, harmed her and had sex with her. And immediately that virtue squad stepped in, and, there was multiple attacks that were coming her way. The one that I shared were the words that my proctor were saying. She was saying, you know, basically they were trying to, let me think how to say it, keep the priest in his holy garments. I'll just say, make it seem like this man had done nothing wrong. And she said to the little girl, well, the problem isn't that the priest touched you. The problem is that, you're too you couldn't keep your legs together. And if you weren't so fat, which she wasn't a fat girl, but this is one of her favorite phrases she would say to little girls, if you weren't so fat, you could have kept your knees together. So they shift the blame from the fact that this grown man has, sexually forced himself on this little girl, to then the problem becomes her, you know, and
Gaslighting on a whole nother level.
right. And so then, they play those mind games from that point on. It becomes, well, you're a liar. You are telling stories. You like to tell tall tales. And that's part of the discrediting, is to call them liars. So anytime they try to come out or say something about it, you're a liar. You lie about everything. In fact, they'll purposely pick out other things in your life, um, where you've made mistakes. And, it may not be something you've really done wrong. Like for me, um, a lot of times going into rituals and stuff, or ritual prep, I would trip, I would fall, I would, trip over something, and I would get a cut then on my knees or my elbow or my hands. What I didn't know until later in life was that um, a lot of that was purposely being done so that they could get willing blood out of me, because I wouldn't cut my hand open. I wouldn't give that willing blood. So what would they do? I would trip, I'd have my knee all skinned up. Who would apply, um, the cloth where to get the bleeding to stop? It would be my proctor. And then what would they do with that cloth? It would later, she would use that blood in the ritual without me even knowing it. So all these years, it's like I had this, mental thought in my mind that I'm clumsy. But the truth was I wasn't clumsy. What was the truth? That as we're walking in, we're in a formation. I have to, walk in step right behind my proctor with two other women, one on each side. And directly behind me is my training partner, whose foot just happens to slide in front of mine at the right moment, causing me to trip and tumble and take all the other women down with me, right? So, was I clumsy? No. You know, it was part of what he was doing, because he had been told that he had to get willing, or he had to make it so they could get willing blood from me. So he was following orders. I didn't know about the orders, you know? And I would later get a "I'm sorry," because I thought, in moments he was uncoordinated also. Sometimes it was purposeful uncoordination. Um, but that was how that system works. So what I want to get to in that, though, is that a lot of the baggage that we carry that keeps us from sharing our testimonies is that through their words, they put in our minds an image about ourselves. And they put that image in our minds so that they can control our voice and keep us from sharing our stories. So look through, you know, your life. What are the images that they've given to you that are not true about you?
Yeah.
And that's, the second acknowledgement we need to make is that for the majority of us, we come out of that system carrying that image that really is not who we are.
Absolutely.
And they've bound us captive in that image. It becomes, I can't tell because. I can't tell, because I'm ugly, or I can't tell because I'm fat, or I can't tell because I'm too shy. I can't tell because of whatever, you know, and we have that image. Another one is I can't tell because people aren't going to receive me, or they're not going to believe me, or they're not going to accept what I have to say. Now, they go further in the system with that type of thinking because they put us into those situations where we experience that people are not believing us as we begin to tell our story. And they are so good at covering up their crimes that I call it the crazy making game. You know, some of that, I would experience where, I talked about my proctor would lock me into the cellar or lock me into basements or they'd put me in the pits. Um, in those basements, I would experience, there would be dead bodies, there would be dead animals, there would be blood dripping from the ceiling, and then finally I'd be let out. Usually it came with a time where after I was let out of the basement, then I'd have a playtime with my siblings. So, where would I usually go? It was outside because the last place I wanted to be was stuck in the house again, with my crazy proctor. Um, so we'd be outside, but then it was like, a couple hours later, my parents would come home and my proctor would say to me, "Oh, why don't you go down in the basement and get soda? Bring up a bottle of soda or, bring up whatever, a jar of green beans or something like that." And immediately, that dread, that fear of re-experiencing what I had just been through would be on my mind, but then I'd go down in the basement, you know, and I remind you, we have to act like there's nothing wrong because this is now our cover life. So we can't show, I couldn't show my parents or break that silence or tell them anything about what I had experienced. But I go down in that basement and guess what? It's perfectly cleaned. There's not a drop of blood anywhere. There's nothing dead. It's just a normal basement. And I come upstairs and I know now that I have absolutely no proof. I can't, even if I wanted to break that silence and share, I can't because everything's cleaned up. There's no evidence. And if I were to say something to my parents, I have nothing to show them. And, so it's that crazy making game. You know it's happened, but everybody else around you um, treats you like you've made it up, like it's your imagination. And, you know, so we have to, they'll push and say, "Oh, well, you must have dreamed that." Maybe, you've always had nightmares. That's another lie they put. You've always had horrific nightmares. They want you to believe that those things are only that you've experienced are only in your horrific nightmares, that they're not really true. So that's the third part is where we begin to say, I know the truth of what I experienced. And I know that I'm speaking truth because I experienced it, I lived it, and I'm choosing to share those experiences with the world, whether they believe me or not. And I'm not going to care if they believe me or not because I'm sharing what I experienced. And so
Absolutely.
taking that control back, that's what, the third place where we take that control over ourselves back. And, stop saying, like, I had one individual, where they were always saying, oh, well, they were kind of stuck under that label that there were mental health issues. And that's where the system goes next. As you grow older, if you continue trying to tell, then they're like, well, now you're confusing your nightmares with reality, so you have to go see a counselor or a psychiatrist who can then help you and diagnose what your mental health issue is, um, and put you on medications to help control your mental health. Um, you know, but
This
as
is
we
all the
begin
stuff. This is all the stuff that Tom Althouse has been speaking with us
to going
about
through,
for the last
exactly,
2 years. They're forever trying to lock him up on 302s.
yeah,
And they kind of will take segments of his conversation and make him sound like he's some kind of a crazy lunatic. Got family, he close family, as in siblings, talking against him, making accusations that he's suicidal, stuff like that. Exactly what you're saying is what our dear Tom
exactly.
Althouse is going through. And on this note, guys, please just keep him in your prayers. He's not in a good space right now regarding all of this stuff. So please just pray for him. Sorry, Jess.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, it's that, I guess that fourth place is acknowledging for yourself, and it starts before yourself and God, where you say, I know what happened to me, and I'm not going to allow um, others to control that narrative. I'm going to be true to myself. I'm going to speak the truth of my experiences. And, many of us, the truth is, many of us survivors, we do have proof. They want us to believe that we don't, that even if we try to come out and tell our stories, that we don't have proof. But we do, because as we begin to speak out together, we realize that, hey, many of us had the same abusers, the same circles. Maybe they were generations apart, but that shows the longevity that somebody who was back in the, 60s and 70s had the same people. They were in the same military programs I was in, with the same individuals running those programs who were high profile military people. That's just an example. Um, it also shows that many of us have the same experiences. Why? Because we were witnessing or experiencing what they called their programs. So, we're finding out that or we know that there's different parts to those programs. Um, the things that I witnessed children go through, I've now been hearing people who went through those programs sharing their stories. And it's like I can validate and say, oh my gosh, yes, like I witnessed that. Um, some of the things that I've realized that, correlate throughout the generations, a lot of the women that were used in the breeder programs, they witnessed, where these doctors, nurses, nuns, after they would induce premature labors, they would throw, little, um, the babies or remains of the babies after some of them they did stuff. It wasn't just deliver those babies premature. Some of them were used in rituals, some were used for organ harvesting. So they would throw those buckets or those body parts into 5-gallon buckets. And many of us have the stories where we experience that, having to go take those buckets down to the kids in cages that were the expendable children and, carry those buckets. And that was used as a form of torture or punishment um, for those of us children in the system. So that's generationally documented. There's 5 survivors that I am aware of who have all had that experience. So as we share our stories, what it does is it correlates some of those experiences among the children because, the system wants us to believe that we're the only one, that we're the oddball out, that as one child begins to tell the truth, what usually happens is that the other children in that family unit or in that circle who have also experienced the same abuse, they don't want the torture or the worst punishment or death, so they will turn against the child that's trying to tell, and that child becomes the scapegoat. And so, they'll all deny the things that are happening, which adds to the crazy game. And it makes that child feel isolated, like they're the only one who's experienced something. But the truth is that this system is operating worldwide. That the training that they do, the programming they do, happens to children in all the states and in all the countries across the world. And so as we begin to share our stories, we find out that, hey, we're not the only one. We're all experiencing this organized, coordinated brotherhood system. When we look into it, it goes all the way back to World War II, beyond that even. But, what I'm talking about specifically is, some of that specific programming that many of us have been experiencing. It connects all the way back to Tavistock, which was used with the Jewish children to torture, kill, maim. So this is an organized, coordinated system that we're going against. We're not just going against 1 or 2 abusers or 1 or 2 people who've hurt us. For the majority of us, we've had multiple individuals involved in our life experiences that have played a part of that abuse, especially when it's satanic ritual abuse. So we're not just going against one individual, we're going against a pack. We're going against multiple circles, we're going against multiple programs.
Very vicious pack too, yeah.
Very vicious because they know that when one person's thrown under the bus, that they're all going to be outed.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Jess, there really is, from my perspective, and you are one of the top whistleblowers, along with many other people out there at the moment doing incredible things. You deal with a lot of backlash, and I'm not just talking about from the cabal. I'm talking about from our viewers, the general public out there. I have on many occasions thought to myself, these are modern day witch trials or witch hunts, whatever you want to call it. I can tell you something, and this had been back in the 1500s, I'd be up in flames alongside you.
We'd be up there together on fire.
That's what I'm saying. Just done differently now. I, over the years, also doing this, and not just with you, but with other overcomers and survivors that have been on our channel, that have shared their stories. And thank God, 95% of our viewers, and I always say thank you to you guys for that, even
Yeah.
if you don't agree with their testimony, are mostly very, very gracious and supportive. And I often get a lump in my throat when I read some of the comments of support for the people coming out. But then you get those. Now, there are those that are the paid trolls, no doubt. So they're
Right.
really there to take people down. But then there are really just the ignoramuses, and I have no other word for it, I'm sorry, who
Yeah.
will follow this bandwagon. Suddenly they'll be love bombing you in your inbox. And the next thing, because you don't suit their narrative anymore, or you've interviewed someone they don't like or don't agree with, suddenly
Right.
you are spreading fake news and you're a faker. And, now the latest thing is they seem to call us is fakers. I'm a faker out there. You know what I'm saying? So how would you say, I don't care about myself. I'm talking more about the survivors and overcomers who are coming out, sharing their stories, and having to deal with ignorant people that really judge you guys by their standards because they have no clue at all what on earth a second in your day could be like, right? So
Yes.
they think that your life has been theirs, so now you must respond the same as them, which is so short-sighted.
Yeah.
How do you encourage someone who's come out and has been slammed by the general public, and very scared to open their mouth again? And it's happening more and more because
Yeah.
the harassers are becoming a lot more vicious than what they were a year or two ago. That's for sure.
Right. I think, really two things or two key words. And really what it stems to is your faith with God. Um, you know, when we come into that place of surrender with him, we know that he wants us to speak out against the wickedness. His word in Isaiah 58, he says, "This is the type of fast I desire." And what is the fast? That we would fast to break those chains of wickedness and to break asunder that yoke of oppression that's over the people. And really this spirit that we're dealing with the harassers is nothing new. Jesus dealt with it too. He talks about the Pharisees and the Sadducees of his time. They did the same things to him to the point where, in John 11 in the Gospels, um, they started to plot and plan to kill him because they did not want him going out. After his death, when his disciples were going out in his name, healing the sick and performing all sorts of signs, wonders, and miracles, they begin to plot against them too and say, "We can't allow these men to continue to go forward in Jesus' name because they're turning many away." And that's a key phrase. They're turning many away from the religion and the false truths that the Pharisees and the Sadducees were teaching. They are part of that system narrative. There's things they want you to believe, and they're going to control that narrative and the beliefs. They have infiltrated the survivor community. They tell the survivors who's authentic and who's not. They tell everybody, "Oh, look at this one. We need, to support her. Let's encourage, let's bring her out." But it's all control, and they're the ones in control. And so when we come to that place before the Lord where we say, "Lord, you've given me a story, you've given me a testimony, and I need to share that. I'm willing to share it." Then we have to stand in that sovereignty of what God has given us to speak out, because in our words that's where others are going to be healed. Others are going to be set free as we share our stories. Others are going to find, that healing that they resonate with, as we share how we've overcome our traumas, our trials, our challenges. And, for me, what it came down to was, am I going to believe all those other voices that are controlling, suppressing, um, dictating where I can go, what I can say, what I can do? Or am I going to be obedient to God, who's told me, you know, this is what you're going to share? And it's that not listening to the other voices, believing in yourself, uh, believing that you have the ability to speak forth your experiences as you experience them. And, so not giving that control away and trusting that as you walk forward in obedience, the Lord's going to bear fruit out of what you share. Um, because, see, what we get under that controlled suppression is dead fruit. What's meant to happen is that as I share out of my personal pain, others resonate with that and they find healing from their pain. They then go forward with their story of how they received healing. And guess what? The fruit continues to bear fruit. Other people continue to have healings. That's the way God designed it to work. But
Absolutely.
what happens with this suppression is, let's give you a little taste of the fruit, but guess what? We're not going to give you enough fruit where you then can go and bear more fruit, because they want you always coming back for the narrative, you
Yeah,
know?
absolutely.
And so we have to
Absolutely.
break those cycles, break free, um, you know, break free of that system control, of the Pharisees' control, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And again, I think the only thing that's going to get us through this is spiritual connection to God, really. That is truly the
That
thing that
is.
is most important, because when you are in that place of alignment with God and just communion with God, I've had some amazing lately. Just, I have this wonderful, beautiful, comfortable space outside, and I always envision myself sitting at the feet of God when I have an issue. And I argue and I'm cheeky with God, and, God this and that, God the next thing. And then just suddenly, that's where I have my moments of inspiration and just that clarity. Because it's in that moment of clarity. I was whinging and whining to God the other day because someone didn't say thank you. I was so mad at this person for not saying thank you for something so, so important. It really got to me. So I actually sat and I said, okay, can you please tell me why I am so annoyed by this? Well, God says to me, well, why don't you tell me? I said, I don't know. I'm asking you. So God says, well, what did you want from the person?
Mm,
I said, just a thank you. So God says to me, well, how about I say thank you? And in that moment, God said thank you. My whole world changed. It was like 1,000 stars, whatever, just exploded in my spirit.
right.
Because it's not about the person, it's about you and understanding your acknowledgement and your place with God. And when you have that moment of truth, nothing else matters. It doesn't matter what the person did or said, or it's between you and your creator and how you deal with that. And for me, that's what I say with this. I say it all the time. when we are especially going into challenging
Yeah.
spaces, to have that time with God is so beautiful. That's
And we
your
all
heart.
need that. I mean, you needed to have your hard work acknowledged. You needed to know that you had worth and value,
Absolutely.
and the Lord gave that to you. Where you were longing for that connection with others, and that's an area we get hit too, is that, you know, there's basic things that make us feel valued and worthy, and that those two feelings are the biggest things the system takes from us. That, we're
Absolutely.
not worthy to be heard, or we're not worthy to have any value, to come forward, um, and we need to break that and understand that we are so, you know, valuable, that we are worthy of being heard, that that's a right. Um, you know,
And I want to just say that since that, probably 5 loose ends in the last 2 days have been tied up
well,
just with stuff that was giving me a little bit of issues in the back of my head.
mhm,
That was it. And it's amazing. And it's, for me, that's how small it is. And that for me is small compared to what you guys go through. So
yeah,
it's like really just sitting in that moment and just knowing that you so need to do this for yourself and God and humanity. And everyone's got your back. Everyone's got your back. All of us have your back. It's just a beautiful, I don't know how to explain it. It's very liberating when
yeah.
one actually, reaches that moment of, yes, now is the time. Let's do it. I think that's a beautiful thing. And I think you are a
Absolutely.
great example of that, where, just to step forward. And I know, in the beginning when we were interviewing as you as well, and I think that's where a lot of people have misunderstood you in terms of what you're releasing. Just by the way, for those viewers who don't know, you've always said, I can only release certain things at a certain
At
time.
certain times, yeah.
And that's what you've done. And I think,
And as I could release more, we've gone back to fill in,
exactly.
you know, to make to fill in the puzzles or the different pieces that people had. So,
Mm, mm.
Absolutely.
yeah, because my
And
heart is
when,
that people have the full story, and I've asked permissions for that. I believe that, the full story will be revealed, and not held back. So,
Yeah, and I just wanted to
absolutely.
say, out of that, for me, the most amazing thing since you came onto our show with your testimonies, and all the other overcomers starting to come on as well, is how
right?
many people started getting their memories back, and how many people started seeing, but hey, this is
Mm.
familiar. Just because
Hmm.
you were brave enough to stand up and do what God
Yeah.
wanted you to do, speak up. You gave a voice to so many other people, and that's what it's amazing when people
Mm.
testify, because I always ask, I don't know that song Testify to Love. It's like a Christian
Oh,
song. It's one of my
that's a good
favorites.
one.
Yes. Yeah, I always sang that. And I believe that's the only thing we can testify is God's love, God's love. And I mean,
Right?
I'm in a normal, abusive, crazy family, but you've been through such crazy stuff. But even in that darkness, God's love shined through, guided you,
Right?
so that you can guide more people. And that's what God does. God's love never ends. God's love never fades away. God's love never disappears. And I think that's the best testimony ever, is to testify for that love. So if you can overcome
Yeah.
something, if you can forgive something, and it's very strange, something that just popped up, the programming, even with children today, if abuse is happening in the family or in the schools or stuff like that, kids easily get shoved away and said, that's your imagination. You are trying to
Right?
bring the teacher in trouble. It's even on the movies. It's so,
Hmm.
that programming is so strong to suppress
Mm.
people speaking their truth. Kids,
Mm.
innocence. Let's say kids and
Right.
innocence telling their
Yeah.
testimony. But this happened. No, no, no. You're trying to be a trouble kid again. No, it's your imagination. So it's funny how strong that programming is, even in the ordinary people lives.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Well,
Amazing.
I would definitely like to go more into this. I don't know if there's anything else you can share with us today. I know you've been chatting to us for so long today, but I would really actually maybe in future go into more of this, talking about those of you who would like to maybe put your testimony forward,
Mhm.
listen to what Jess has to say. Maybe she can give you some advice what to do. Not as in, I mean, everyone has to do it in their own way, but
Right.
the place you get to, it's so important, because this is how, as you were saying at the beginning of the show, Jess, the more people who speak up, it's like these little seeds that just pop up all over. They can't control so many people. Let's never forget they're 1%. And they've really just been very, very clever in terms of how they've controlled, and the manipulation and the
Right.
fear tactics with which they've controlled us.
I
So,
see. So before I start that, I see a dandelion, and then you blow it, and all those
yeah,
dandelion seeds are. Oh.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So,
Well, I
yeah, I'm
encourage
not.
people, yeah, check out my new website, kingdomlivingwithjessie.com. On there, I have 2 shows, Riding the Storms and Rise Up. And, on there, I want to help people understand that, um, the things that we have, it's very, like some of us, we just need to know like where to start or what to do. So I try to make those shows very tangible. We talk about different topics like deliverance. We'll be doing a show on testimonies where, um, I'll break down kind of, how do you begin to really, there's 2 different types of testimonies, I guess I'll get into. We have our testimony of the trauma that we've come out of, and that connects to our testimony of how we've come to the Lord. Um, so there's kind of 2 different avenues you can go with that, but, many of us, we don't know how to connect the 2 together. So, even if we do a future show on that, I think it's important to know, how do we begin to make those connections in bringing forward our story, in a way that people, want to hear, want to listen to what we have to say.
I think
So
that's
it
a
means,
great
both. We
idea.
have to talk about the good and the bad,
Mm.
um, because that's how we overcome. The Lord meets us in our trauma. He leads us to places where there's healing along the way. He even leads other people into our lives, and that becomes part of the full story. So,
Absolutely. In such a beautiful way, right? It's just
right,
such a beautiful way that God really works in mysterious ways. It's just amazing to see.
absolutely.
So I want to really also just take this opportunity and again extend to our viewers that if there is anyone of you watching, and I know I get very beautiful messages as well. Our shows do trigger a lot of people, but very much in a good way, I'm told, the ones that let
Mhm.
me know anyway. It assists people to bring up their memories and things as well. So I know a lot of that has gone on. If there's anyone out there who is ready to share your story, we still offer our platform for our overcomers. And it doesn't only have to just be SRA or something extremely extreme. If you're a
Mhm.
survivor of domestic abuse, if you're a survivor of child abuse from your parents, in terms of mental abuse, physical abuse, it doesn't have to be sexual as well. If you've turned a corner in your life and you feel like you'd love to share, then please reach out, because I think it's so important. It's not just the extreme stories we want to hear.
Right.
It's everyone has their own healing and trauma that they deal with. It doesn't have to be
Yeah.
extreme. Getting a smack from your father might have been the most traumatic thing in your life. You know, each person deals with their trauma in different ways. So please reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. Share the good healing, share the good vibes, because really this is a time for peace. It's a time of reconciliation. Joining arms together, we can see the opposing forces are getting quite vicious right now. I really didn't ever think I'd see the day that it got like this. Just spiritually, we know we're in a spiritual warfare right now. So let's stick together, pray for each other, just send each other much love and happiness and joy and abundance in our tribe here. So Jess, anything else from you before we bid you farewell and before you end off for us in prayer again?
No, I think I just encourage people, as you were saying, there's a lot of people who are experiencing hard times right now, especially those who have overcome and those who are survivors. The holidays in general are a very hard time for many. So I just encourage everybody to find ways to really show love, show encouragement, show kindness, whether it's a kind word. You never know what thoughts that person's having or the depth of darkness that they're going through. So
Absolutely.
sometimes that just a little kind word or a show of support can be, what keeps them pressing forward in life. So, let's just be the beautiful people that we are, and love with our words, love in our deeds, and let those thoughts shine forth that really bring glory to the Lord. Um, and that can come in different ways. So I'm just going to go into prayer from that, but Lord, I just thank you. And we just ask today that you would release those beautiful thoughts of love, kindness, gentleness, tenderness to us, that you would show us the thoughts that are on your mind that you have towards us, that not just that we would love others, but that we would be able to love ourselves, Lord, that we would see how wonderfully made we are, that you have formed us, you have formed the days for us towards good works so that we can have a future and we can have a hope and we can have peace and joy. Um, and I ask that that would break forth now, that you would bring it to light, and that we would walk in this newness of life that you've given to us. So we thank you above all that all of these good things come from your hand. And we just open up our hands to receive the things that you have for us in abundance. And we ask that all that we say, all that we do, would go forth bearing great fruit, even up to tenfold or more, Lord. We ask that you would multiply um, the fruit that we bear in our lives. And we ask this in your powerful name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen, amen, amen. Thank you, beautiful Jess. That was amazing. Really enjoyed our double dose today, and we will be back with more, everybody. So stay tuned. Next week, we'll let you know. Who knows? Maybe we can convince Jessie to do another double dose.
Maybe I'll let you know.
I'm putting her on the spot here. I think we had to give a Paula our viewers they'd all go, yeah, yeah, yeah.
They're
We
all
want.
raising their hands. Yes, yes.
Okay. God bless you, everybody. Thank you, Jessie. Thank you, Mornay. Mwah. We will see you very soon. If you haven't already, please like, share. And this is such an important one to share. So please just share this. For anyone who you know, especially if they might be coming out, scared to speak. Their voice is so important. Thank you so much, everybody. God bless you. See you next week. Cherry buys.